Hello, everybody, and welcome to WorldSmithers.
WorldSmithing.
Smithers?
WorldSmithing, you idiot.
Smithers! Where we...
Smithers.
Yes, WorldSmithers.
WorldSmithing, you idiot.
Where we go and find new, bold places to world build with you so that we can create tabletop role-playing game style areas. Yeah. God, what an intro, huh?
Uh-huh. Agreed.
I'm Cody.
And I'm Joe, and I'm still not used to this.
I'm still not used to this either. So basically what we're doing with this series is we're going to take a concept, and it can be anything, and we're going to world build a little bit. We're going to create, we're going to talk about why and what to expect with this world building. We're going to do some macro level exercises, some micro level exercises, and then at the end, when everything's said and done, we will create session 1, what the players would expect in our game. So this is a primarily tabletop role-playing game thing, although it is a creative exercise, so, feel free to, bring your creative friends who like to, writers, all those kinds of things. So, do you want to introduce the concept, or the concept that we'll be working on?
I thought we were doing a disclaimer at the top.
Oh, well, yeah. So, okay, that's fair. So, hold on, let me go get my soapbox real quick.
Okay.
It's good Foley work. Okay. All right. I'm gonna shuffle my papers, and just kind of straight out the gate. I'm going to talk about the concept of culture appropriation, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, but it is something that we are going to be trying our best to be aware of as we do these, because some of these concepts, like the one we're working on today, may have some cultural significance for people. And we realize that as white males, that creating this setting and other settings has a chance to be offensive to some people. And that being said, we're going to try to keep this, appropriate and not change or misconstrue the original intent of cultural elements that we may borrow and what those mean. We're doing this for fun and don't want to be mean-spirited about this. So if you find that what we're talking about is like pure, absolute, concentrated culture appropriation garbage and you hate us, feel free to reach out to us on our at www.fandomroulette.com and tell us about what you're experiencing so that we can learn and so that we can, work through this together. Because again, this is a learning experience for us as well. For those of you who are going to potentially be using what we're using, as this is content created for you, the audience, just be aware that some of the things that we may make may be offensive to some people. And if it is, it's a great time to learn something and try to get into the deeper aspects of it and get that person even closer to the game as you change and manipulate what we've created into something that is, appropriate for you and your table. So, without further ado...
Yeah, so this week we are going to be building kind of a various kinds of a fantasy Egypt. So real quick, I'm going to talk about a quick little thing, an RPG setting that exists out there in the world that I believe is called Banestorm. I could double check this for next time.
Sure.
But the basic concept of Banestorm is that it is our world, right? It is our world. And then but one day like portals started popping up around the places, and like various fantasy or heightened worlds started popping up and smashing into different places in our world. So like for instance, there's like this little chain of islands right off of France that are like Alexander Dumas, like Count of Monte Cristo and Three Musketeers, like hack slash sword fighting. There is like a 1001 Arabian Nights version of like the Middle East that pops up right next door to our contemporary Middle East and things like that. and little things like that as well. I think there's like a Fey realm that pops up in England. Um, so yeah, this was something I kind of was thinking about as we were building this. But one of the reasons
And
that
you were right. It is Banestorm.
hey,
It is
yeah,
GURPS Banestorm, if anyone is interested in checking that out.
it was a GURP system. That's correct. Um, but so yeah, there's always been something that's been kind of fascinating to me about Egypt. Ever since I was a little kid. We would go to museums and I would just like be fascinated by looking at the various sarcophagi and the statues and just the concept of the fact that, you know, there were mummies and that there were these deities that were half human and half animal. Then as you get older, you learn about like the pyramids and the curses, and you learn about the little like the whole realm of the afterlife, those things that they find almost all the time when they're doing digs, called like swabes, which were like little clay men that were supposed, or clay people that were supposed to help you in the afterlife and things like that. Um, and so like there was so much to me that was magical and mystical. And this is kind of a problem because that was very much true of Europeans of the 19th and 20th centuries. And so you know, um there was kind of this feeling, you know, this age of exploration where these like European travelers would kind of come in and take artifacts or damage artifacts or things like that. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I was developing this is I was thinking about The Mummy starring Brandon Fraser.
Yeah.
Which was sort of kind of used that aesthetic, and I kind of used that to base my kind of like worldsmithing. Um, so two things really quick that I want to talk about, and then I'll kind of like dip it over to you. Um, so the one big thing that I was thinking about this is kind of there's like a little story I love to hear, which is when they finally figured out how to translate the Rosetta Stone, so they could finally, for the first time, translate Egyptian hieroglyphs. People were so excited because they were like, "Oh, we're gonna learn so many secrets from the Egyptians who have like figured out how to like, you know, like the mysticism of Egypt and things like that." And then what they found out was that it was just like a lot of receipts and a lot of like account books and things like that, because that's one of the main reasons that like the written language was invented, was to like keep track of finances and things like that. But I feel like that in a way it made people like misconstrue a lot of aspects of you know, like ancient Egyptian culture. And so like one of the main things is I think it would be really fascinating to sort of have an American gods approach where it's like the actual Egyptian gods and then a group of the Egyptian gods who have the powers that Europe seemed to think that they have. Um, and so basically what that means is like you could have clerics from multiple domains, or like clerics like worshiping the same deity, but having like multiple or different domains based on the different assumptions of what these deities represented. Now, the other big thing is I was thinking that I would put emphasis on going through old tombs and things like that. And really taking advantage of these mystical traps that you always hear about when you're learning about like the tombs and things like that. It sounds like for the most part they were a little overstated, but I was thinking that if I were to be running a campaign, you would be a group of like native Egyptian people who are basically like trying to preserve your culture, your like these artifacts, these tombs and things like that. And so they don't differentiate, they don't necessarily care who's there, so you're still going through, but it's to sort of get in front of and get ahead of this like band of European adventurers who are trying very hard to just like take these items and take them back home. You're trying to get them and get them elsewhere. So like you're still going to be dealing with like, you know, some of the mystical creatures of Egyptian mythology, and dealing with like the traps and tombs in a way to preserve your your cultural heritage. There you go.
Yeah.
It'd be very much like that group from from The Mummy and also from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So
Yeah, for sure.
those are kind of my big ideas for it. Um, what about you, Cody?
Yeah, so when we decided on this topic, the first thing that came to mind was the Mummy movies, for sure, with Brendan Fraser. So I guess for me, the kind of the appealing part is like that kind of pulpy adventure where people, traverse through, harsh environments and like enter tombs and temples filled with traps and things to stop them, and dealing with like, I kind of like I kind of really like, I guess I'm really just looking for that kind of like that thrill of adventure,
Uh-huh.
right? So like that's like the big draw of like, like, oh, there's these tombs and things like that. And there was so much like, there was all these things that we learned about like how there were curses, and like, they'd open up one part of the tomb and people just started dying, and like there's all these like really cool like stories of Egypt, and like putting them in a scenario where like, I think you put it best, where you are working to basically that like someone is trying to rob a tomb, and like you have been tasked by one of the great pharaohs of the land to be like, hey, we can't like we know that they're bad news, but we need you to like get in there, grab the thing that they want and get it to us before they can take it and do the, nefarious things with such stuff. um you could also do like an evil campaign where you're on the other side of that, if that's the game that you want to play. But I like the idea of like being like, oh, you are chosen by the, the pharaohs of the land to like protect these places, and like you find out during one of your normal days that like someone busted into like, someone's, like a really ancient tomb, and if they grab this thing, like, it would be, a great dishonor, for everybody involved. And like obviously like like the thing, it would obviously be like filled with like kind of dungeon delves, right? Like,
Yeah.
big elaborate like places to enter. The more traps the better. I would probably lean heavier on like puzzles and traps and things like that, but like still have like action set pieces where like maybe you're um maybe the rival, or not rival, but like maybe the tomb robbers, like they brought it like, they brought like a bunch of people with them, and like they've got guarded out the side entrance like a couple of like, thug looking types, and you got to like, beat them and start to basically race them as they get further and further into this tomb. um in terms of like a setting, I'm kind of cool with whatever.
Yeah.
um I know like there could be the modern take on it where it's like this place has like kind of come and gone and like has recently been rediscovered.
Hmm.
And then like there are people there who are like, you know descendants of, a long lost empire, and they're like, hey, like, no, you don't just get to come in here and steal all of our stuff. And like maybe you're a part of that group, and like, these explorers from a far off land are just like, oh, we'll take whatever we want. And then you're trying to stop them. I'm also interested in like being like right in the heart of things, where like, you know we'll call it the middle of like a flourishing fantasy Egyptian empire, where like the pharaohs had to hire, basically they have to hire, temple guards and things like that, or tomb guards, to basically make
Hmm.
sure that people don't rob them. Like it doesn't necessarily have to like fall on the explorers from another land. Like I'm sure thievery, or that very concept, like, just exists. So
Sure.
like I'm sure there was somebody just like some local bandit gang is just like, you know what, we're gonna take that, sell it to another noble or whatever, turn a quick buck, whatever, and then like you could be a part of that temple guard, and maybe the thing they grab they don't realize actually holds some kind of like, and to put the fantasy in a fantasy Egypt, like maybe that's a some kind of magical amulet that like awakens some kind of great quest where you have to go and like go into other tombs and you got to collect all the pieces, and they stop the end of the world because one of the Egyptian gods was like, I put this here because like eventually you'll fuck up.
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking of the catharsis of just
Yeah, absolutely. And
fighting against people stealing your shit.
oh, absolutely. And like that's such a like that's like such a big thing in like pulpy adventures,
Sure.
but putting like a nicer spin on it, because I know that like the terminology pulpy adventures kind of comes with its own myriad of problematic issues, but like taking that concept of like you know risking life in these dangerous areas to like do good or do whatever, and then like put it in put it in like harsh environments, tombs filled with traps, like that is the jam.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are
So
my major ideas.
yeah, so how so question for you, because we
Yeah.
should agree on all of this, in terms of where or when this takes place, when would you like to have our session one or our campaign in this world take place?
I was thinking I'm really feeling like the 1920s or like 1930s.
Okay.
Yeah, there that sort of that what's the word I'm looking for? That the Mummy era
Right.
of exploration. So,
Okay, so yeah, we want to get a little more, we want to stay on genre.
yeah,
Cool.
some slight modernity there.
Cool.
Um
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm done with that. Um so I think that being said, the theme, I think we're both settled on the idea of being like protectors of these
Mhm.
great ancient wonders,
Agreed.
and then maybe having that hook like come up somewhere. So for the next couple of episodes, so like I said at the beginning, we're going to do some macro and micro stuff. So we're going to create we'll call it like the general, like we'll create the for the macro episode, or like the thinking big episode. We're going to talk about how our Egypt fantasy is fantasy, I guess, for a lack of a better term. We're going to talk
Yep.
about, the Egyptian gods and how they actually like interact in our tabletop role playing game. Like, are they these forces that kind of show up all the time? Or are they a little more mysterious? Like,
Mhm.
those kinds of questions we will be talking about in the macro episode, along with like the culture of things. Like, what does our fantasy Egypt set in 1920s, what does the culture look like around these big tombs that we're trying to protect? um Maybe that includes like factions, or maybe like just how we're gonna do politics, if you will, of
Yeah.
our pulpy adventure. um and then at a micro level, so thinking smaller, we're gonna build the city and maybe the intro to the tomb of where we're going, right? So like the players are going to be these temple guards, but we need to start somewhere that's like their home, or like the area in which they stay. So we'll talk about, maybe the local areas that they'll get into as they kind of progress through session 1, but then also talk about like, you know who are the playing forces in this town or whatever, and we'll figure out all the specifics, or talk about the specifics as we work on them in between the episodes. And then finally, our last episode, so probably a 4-part series, although
Yeah.
that remains to be seen yet. we will basically walk through what session one looks like as the game master or the dungeon master, and how we've taken this macro concept in this micro town and turn it into an experience that you can give to your players as like, all right, this is, y'all start in the, wherever you start, what do you do kind of thing. And kind of come up with like the encounters they'll potentially deal with, and not like too much nitty gritty, but like the types of things they would be expecting in session one.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that is basically our format for Fantasy Egypt. I'm excited to work on this. There's something about Egyptian mythology, whether it's like just Age of Mythology, the computer game, and just like all the stuff that I learned. Like, I'm really excited to like figure out like, oh, what kind of Egyptian gods can we use as like story bits, like things to move the story forward. Like, does Ra, like, is this like a temple of Ra, and like inside is like some ancient weapon used to help defeat the enemies of Ra or whatever, or or like, what does the political spectrum look like? Because I know, if memory serves, and I could be wrong, which is why we're going to do research as we progress through this, like there's a pharaoh, or like, kind of the equivalent of like a king or something, or some political head figure who kind of rules over, the land, if you will. And so like, what does that look like? Does the pharaoh have like, like a group of like followers who help kind of progress this, this fantasy Egypt, or, do these forces that work with the, the quote unquote government of fantasy Egypt, how do they work? Are they kind of like at each other's throats and they all have their own agendas, or like, we'll kind of figure this stuff out as we go. But I am excited.
I am too.
Yeah, the setting's going to be really cool. Again, we're going to try to keep this as as fun and not mean-spirited. We're not trying to offend people. We just like, I know, me personally, I love this stuff. Like, I love taking like real world things and like trying to like make like kind of like an alternate version of it to like play with friends, so that you can like be like, oh yeah, like I understand those references, and like, maybe we can throw in some little history lessons here and there about why we chose what we chose for, like, like how the political structure's set up and things like that. So yeah, I'm really excited for this one.
Yep. But yeah, I am as well. It's going to be interesting to see how things progress from here. Kind of getting micro, macro, etc., etc.
Yeah, are you excited to teach me a thing or two about is it appropriate to say ancient Egypt?
Yeah, I mean, I'll. It's something that I have not studied as extensively as other sections of the world.
Okay.
Like I said, it was kind of a childhood obsession that it inspired my love of history in general. But it's one of those deals where it's like it's there's so much density about it. It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All right.
shall we wrap her up?
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for our first episode of WorldSmithing. I totally biffed it earlier. It's not World Smithers, because that sounds funny as shit. It's WorldSmithing. Um I'll fix that in post, probably. But thank you guys so much for our first episode of this. If you'd like to basically talk to us, converse about, how you feel about the idea of us creating Fantasy Egypt and, this kind of cool pulpy style, you can do so at our website at www.fandomroulette.com. You go all the way to the bottom, and there's a little section where you can like fill out your internet tag, and basically a text box that'll let you talk to us that we can see. You can also go to our email. You can send us an email at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com with the thoughts that you have. If you like this and you want to see more, we are on all sorts of platforms, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, all those things. So feel free to like, subscribe, smash the bell, do all the things. Any little bit helps us, and any feedback helps us as we progress through our bold new frontier of tabletop role-playing games as our big topics of discussion. We're also on social media if you want to hear when I stream, or if you just want some fun memes and things like that, you can find us at Fandom Roulette on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Our Twitter handle being FandomR_podcast. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We super appreciate you. And if you like this episode, definitely tell us how you feel about it, because we are excited.
Yep. I'm excited for it as well. Thank you once again for listening. And then signing off for Fandom Roulette, this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.